Good evening, and please let me welcome all our guests from all over Europe, independent and brave, brilliant minds, all united in efforts for peace and security of Europe. I'm especially proud to welcome at our debate, it's common event of Mysl Polska, the oldest Polish weekly independent magazine, and Wbrew Cenzurze, against censorship internet channel. Our guests from Romania, Great Britain, United States, and of course our co-host from Poland. Let me introduce our very special guest, Diana Iovanovici-Şoșoacă, independent senator, member of the Senate of Romania. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear you.
George Galloway, leader of the Workers' Party of Britain, for 26 years, British MP, host of the brilliant The Mother of All talk shows. Welcome, George.
Thank you. A great pleasure to be with you.
Larry C. Johnson, former analyst of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CEO of Berkshire Societies, LLC. Colonel Douglas McGregor, former senior advisor to the U.S. Acting Secretary of Defense. Chris Williamson, former Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Fire and Emergency Services, leader of the resistance movement, and member of the Workers' Party of Britain. Welcome.
Good to be with you. Thanks very much indeed.
We hope that David Pine, former U.S. Army HQ staff officer and foreign advisor of Vivek Ramaswamy, Republican Party presidential primaries candidate, will join us soon. I'd like to welcome and express our gratitude to co-organizers of our debate, two representatives of independently free polls, George Brown, Polish MP, renowned movie director, leader of the Confederation of the Polish Crown, and one of the leaders of the Confederation Liberty and Independence.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Roman Fitz, entrepreneur, vice chair, and expert of foreign affairs of the Confederation of the Polish Crown.
Hello, nice to meet you. All the best to you.
And our debate is moderated by my friend, Dr. Mateusz Piskorski, former Polish MP, journalist, scholar, and political prisoner of the pro-NATO regime in Poland. Welcome, Mateusz.
Well, thank you very much, Konrad. And as we see, Larry Johnson has joined us from the United States.
I've made it.
Larry, we have already introduced you here, but we are glad to see that you are here with us. Okay, so if we might start with the escalation problem. We wanted to devote this international discussion to talk about the escalation of the current conflict and the prospects of this escalation in the future. I would like to ask you, all our guests from different countries, about the possible red lines. We are hearing more and more about the red lines for Moscow. What is the real red line, in your opinion, for Moscow, which could escalate further the conflict, escalate it territorially as well? Ms. Senator Şoșoacă, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I have no doubts, especially of what happened in last week. Romania, like Poland, is living this risk of escalation because there are two countries used by NATO to send weapons to Ukraine. Moreover, Romania has become a hub for NATO and Ukrainian pilots, so this is a place where pilots will train and then attack Russia. I did an online poll myself and my party, S.O.S Romania party, to consult the people on whether they choose peace or war. And despite the fact that the website on which we conducted the poll was attacked by government hackers, the poll still showed that more than 2/3 of the population wants peace. Therefore, the power knows that it has no chance to engage Romania on the path of war if a consultation would take place through referendum, which is why the power does not even intend to ask its citizens what they really want, because it would be something completely opposite to the decisions taken by the power in Bucharest. Romania is closely linked in this dangerous direction with the Republic of Moldova. The two states collaborating in irritating and provoking the Russian Federation. This is my opinion. It's about irritating and provoking Russian Federation and in taking Ukraine's side in a conflict that concerns neither of us, Romanians, nor the Republic of Moldova. Both these two countries, Republic of Moldova and Romania, are arming themselves, or at least they spend billions on it. The weapons don't necessarily go to Romania, but to Ukraine. Worse, the war has approached Romania's border in the south, in the Odessa region, where several Russian drones bombed Ukraine's Danube ports after the grain deal ended. Just a few kilometers from Romania, in fact, there are 22 kilometers from our town Galați, which is a port. Romania is now the preferred destination for Ukrainian grain that can no longer be transported through the corridor established under the grain agreement. So Romania is helping Ukraine export its grain, thus exposing itself to the risk of being drawn into the conflict. I asked NATO in my last statement, I asked NATO and the EU to take note that the Romanian people did not authorize any military aid to Ukraine, and I asked the authorities in Bucharest to ban the import of grain from Ukraine because priority must be given to the interests of the Romanian people, Romania's territorial integrity, and the defense of Romanian citizens.
Thank you very much, Senator. I would like to ask our British and American guests to let me give the word to another representative of Parliament of a Central European country, of my country, Poland, because we are starting from the region which is threatened by this escalation directly, I guess. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask Mr. Grzegorz Braun, member of Polish Parliament, about his opinion about the risks of escalation, particularly when it comes to Poland. Mr. Braun.
Thank you very much. Well, I was hoping to listen more than to talk, to listen to the opinion, the views of people who have the privilege and comfort to look at us from far away, maybe seeing some hope and maybe having some good advice. Looking from here, from Warsaw, we can unfortunately see that we've been taken hostages by the players of the great game that is being played for centuries at our Central European playground. Obviously, the Warsaw authorities, the government, the president are not the authors of the script that they are proceeding according to. We can also see visible signs of some important change in the public opinion. The public opinion which was surprised and taken by surprise a year ago, the public opinion that wouldn't listen to any let's say Ukraino-skeptical voices last year, the public opinion seems to be more and more open, and we have some statistics, some new research that tells us that our slogan and our campaign that we started last summer, the previous summer, stop Ukrainization of Poland, that sentence is much better understood now than it was a year ago. So we have a kind of small match being played here in Poland, and the clock is ticking and time is running, and the authorities have to take decisions. If they don't, they might lose the audience, because the Polish audience is more and more tired of Ukrainian rule, which is a fact as far as Polish interests, Polish foreign and internal policy is concerned. So this is a very special moment. I wouldn't bet on it, but in 2 weeks we'll see either election or martial law.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Well, Mr. Williamson, what do you think? Are we really on the verge, and is there a probability that we'll have an escalation towards a nuclear war, as some claim?
Well, I certainly hope not, obviously. I mean, I think the political class and the corporate media in the United Kingdom have taken leave of their senses and certainly been incredibly provocative, and have tried to do their level best to manipulate public opinion. And I was struck really by Grzegorz Braun's remark about being taken hostage. I think that's absolutely an appropriate description, really, of the way in which the public across Europe and the United Kingdom have indeed been taken hostage. We've seen the imposition of sanctions against Russia, which have rebounded back and have caused a cost of living catastrophe, actually, not just a crisis, a catastrophe for millions of people in Britain. We have around 14.5 million people living in poverty who are already really struggling with a cost of living crisis, and these ballooning energy bills that they are now having to face, and increased food prices, which I think can be directly linked to the war in Ukraine, are having a devastating effect. In spite of that, though, the politicians continue to speak in very bellicose terms about the importance of defeating Russia, of continuing to send more and more armaments to the Ukraine in order to make this proxy war continue as long as they possibly can. And, you know, that's obviously causing or exacerbating the difficulties that people are experiencing. And indeed, we've even heard, haven't we, you know, certain, how can we put it, less than sensible individuals talking about the possibility of a limited nuclear war, of winning a limited nuclear war. This is absolutely absurd. It's crazy. And the late, great Tony Benn once said that if we can find the money to kill people, we can find the money to help people. And, you know, Britain is a very wealthy nation and could certainly be doing more to ameliorate the impact. But of course, the most important thing that we need to be pushing them to do is to push for peace. And there's not a single politician at the moment represented in the House of Parliament that is actually doing that. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, we'll continue to do what we can to shift public opinion. And I remain hopeful that we don't see an escalation to nuclear war, because that obviously will then mean the end of humanity. You know, the information, knowledge is power, and you know, if we can inform the public, then I hope that they will be able to put the pressure on the policymakers to ensure that, you know, the wiser heads do prevail.
Thank you. Mr. Williamson has noticed some, let's say, economic and financial aspects of the whole conflict. What do you think, Mr. Galloway, about the articles and explanations of Seymour Hersh concerning the explosions on the Baltic Sea and the implications of those explosions for Europe as a whole. Mr. Galloway.
The prospect of a new German-Romanian lash-up threatening the people, the Russian-speaking, ethnically Russian people in the east and the south of Ukraine is a historical echo, a historical resonance that is filled with real significance. And if I may, to my dear friends in Poland, it will be one of the great mysteries of history that Poland, which suffered so much from the alliance between the extreme Ukrainian nationalists and their Nazi allies in the Holocaust in the East, should now be being used as the allies of the Banderite dark forces, the Black Hundreds of Banderism, in alliance with the Polish government, is almost an obscenity. And I was greatly encouraged by Mr. Brown's intervention to hear that Polish people are beginning to look again at their previously unalloyed support for this NATO proxy war against Russia. The opportunity cost of the $140 billion Joe Biden has given to Ukraine can be seen on the streets of Philadelphia. They can be seen in the canyons of horror of the drug addiction and homelessness and crime and racial conflict in the United States itself. Your Excellency, Mr. Chairman, you asked first time before I was frozen, my apologies. What are Russia's red lines in this? President Putin outlined Russia's red lines 15 years ago in Munich, and he was ignored then and continues to be ignored until now. And before we know it, we may indeed cross that Russian red line. The Russian government has been very patient in their prosecution of this war, far more patient than the British and American governments were in pulverizing the people of Iraq 20 years ago. We destroyed all the infrastructure in Iraq in a single 24 hours. The Russian leadership has been patient, but that patience should not be confused with resignation. The Russians understand the scale of the importance of their patience running out. And their red line is this, Excellency: the breakup of the Russian Federation is their red line. Any military advance by NATO which threatens to break up the Russian Federation, of which, of course, Crimea is an indisputable part, and historically for centuries an indisputable part, will be a casus belli for war between Russia not and their Ukrainian proxies, but the people behind them, who include your government and mine. And so we should stop well short of encouraging the proxy, arming the proxy, financing the proxy, propagandizing for the proxy, well short of crossing that ultimate red line. And as to the question of nuclear warfare, the whole world is queuing to see the new film Oppenheimer. But we don't appear to have learned what Oppenheimer himself learned, that this weapon that he first brought to the battlefield was pregnant with the end of human civilization. So I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to address you. I apologize, it has necessarily to be brief because I have the mother of all talk shows this evening and must prepare for it. But my colleague, Chris Williamson from the Workers' Party of Britain can ably deputize for me in the rest of the discussions.
Colonel Douglas McGregory joining us. Thanks for your participation in our debate. Colonel, the basic question we are trying to discuss today is about the risk of escalation of the current conflict. What do you think, how would you estimate these risks, and when it comes to the next steps of, potential steps of this escalation, are there any true red lines for Moscow when it comes to weapon supplies from the West, which might bring further escalation?
I think the so-called red lines have already been crossed in most cases. As a result, I think the Russians have taken the position that they must prepare for the worst. I don't think they believe anything that Washington says. Warsaw has become unambiguously hostile to them. So I don't know that anything that comes out of either Washington or Warsaw would be taken very seriously by the Russians. I think the Russians have decided that short of nuclear war, anything is possible. They made it very clear repeatedly that unless they are attacked with a nuclear weapon, they will not use nuclear weapons. And indeed, there is no real reason why they should. They hold a strategic initiative. They are winning. And the Ukrainians are in terrible condition, terrible shape. So it's very hard to imagine that the Ukrainian state and its armed forces will hold together much longer. So the real question is not what will the Russians do. The Russians, if they hear nothing from the West and no one is willing to negotiate with them, will complete the conquest of eastern Ukraine. Then I suspect they will cross the Dnieper River and begin moving west. What they will not tolerate is a rump Ukraine that is part of NATO. That's an impossibility. So unless the West steps forward and says, we agree, whatever the new Ukrainian state looks like, however large it is, whatever its borders may be, it will be neutral, then I think we can talk seriously to the Russians. But short of that, I see no end in sight, except the arrival of hundreds of thousands of Russian troops on the Polish border.
Thank you very much. Now, well, I would like to come to the country which is probably the most influential when it comes to the current war. Some even claim that it's a proxy war between the United States and Russia. I don't know if they are right or wrong, but let's listen to our guest from the United States, former CIA analyst, Mr. Larry Johnson. Larry, I would like to ask you a question about the role of Poland, Romania, and all other Central European countries in this strategy in the war in Ukraine. We have lately learned from American edition of Newsweek that the main CIA hub for the operation in Ukraine is based on our territory in Poland. We didn't know about that before. What do you think when it comes to the escalation and when it comes to the plans of current Biden administration? Is it possible that the conflict could escalate outside the territory of Ukraine?
Up to this point, Russia has been very patient. They've had, I think, ample reason to strike at military targets inside Poland because Poland's facilitation of the transport of war materials, supplies, personnel into Ukraine, and then those attacks that are carried out on some on Russian territory, particularly the military planning, the ability to target civilian locations like they just did in Moscow overnight or today, is something that at some point it's going to necessitate a response from Russia. I think we've already seen with the deployment in both Poland and Romania of the Aegis battery. The missile batteries capable of carrying a nuclear warhead is already a potential red line as far as Vladimir Putin is concerned. He raised that issue very directly with Joe Biden in December of 2021, and ultimately Biden rebuffed Putin's plea. But it is really akin to what the Soviets did in putting missiles in Cuba back in 1961, 62. So I think one of the red lines we're coming up on is with each of these terrorist attacks that are taking place in Russia, the pressure in Russia to retaliate is growing stronger, and they've shown a greater willingness to target tactical operation centers, joint operation centers. And at those centers, there are NATO personnel, American intelligence officers, British intelligence officers, and the highly likelihood that in the future, if they have not already suffered casualties, there will be casualties. And I think there has been that confusion that the many in the West are interpreting Russia's special military operation as a sign of weakness, ineptitude, incompetence. And they don't understand that Russia is being very focused in not trying to cause civilian casualties, unlike Ukraine, and trying to limit the damage that it is inflicting. But with each passing day and with each additional terrorist attack, I see that line getting blurred and Russia may cross it.
I see, Larry, and when it comes to the limits of support from United States, that's very interesting for us, I think. Are there any limits within the Biden administration? I know that the Republicans are calling for practically complete ceasing of the support for Ukraine, yes, the military one. But when it comes to the administration there, some of us have heard opinions about the current CIA director, William Burns, who seems to understand Russia better than Victoria Nuland and some other people in the Biden administration. Is that true?
I used to think that was the case, but Burns has said some pretty stupid things of late and has been almost as bellicose as Victoria Nuland and Anthony Blinken. I think really the danger here is the United States is making what I'll call symbolic gestures. Oh, they're going to send M1 Abrams tanks in September. September's too late. You know, basically the United States has been sending a lot of junk to Ukraine. It's not these highly touted weapon systems. They've all been failures. The Patriot, failure. HIMARS, good at killing civilians, not good at destroying military emplacements. And nobody's really picked up on the fact. You remember last September when Russia started building defensive lines in the south of Ukraine, down around Kherson. They built 3 defensive lines. At no time during that process was Ukraine ever able to launch any kind of military strike to destroy those emplacements or to attack the people building them. I mean, these things didn't magically produce themselves. You had to go out there and with construction equipment to put in place the dragon teeth and to dig trenches and to, everything else that went into it. At no time did Ukraine even then have the air power or long distance missile capability to disrupt and take that out. And they haven't got any better capabilities now. It's worse. So what we're witnessing is a death spiral of the Ukrainian military, and it's completely propped up by the United States. And as long as Europe continues to acquiesce in this, and particularly Poland, as long as Poland allows itself to be played for a fool, which it is, because there's no way the United States is going to actually sit, if a shooting war starts between Russia and Poland, the United States is not going to send its troops in there to die. If Poland's in the crosshairs, the United States will be moving the opposite direction.
Thank you. That's quite pessimistic but realistic, I guess, what you say, concerning the history and experience we have. I'd like to turn to Mr. Fritz, if possible, and ask about, we are discussing now the escalation, so my question is, should we really be afraid of 100 Wagner Group members, as our Prime Minister told?
Who are in Belarus?
No,
the Polish border. What do you think?
But let me express some comments, short comments, just to the topic which we had before. So, just for your imagination, dear guests from abroad, Poland has quite long border with Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and we have millions of the guests from Ukraine living in Poland with the unregistered weapons. So casus belli is very easy thing to prepare, to make any provocation, just bomb in the front of the Russian embassy or something like that.
Yeah.
And this can be casus belli in a very easy way, that much easier than attack from Wagner troops from Belarus. It is, of course, my private opinion. On the other hand, back to the discussion about the American troops that stay in Polish territory in the southeastern Poland. That troops, they have the strategic missiles that cannot be used for the Ukrainian territory, I think. That is because of the other strategic target, which can be Iran. But it is, of course, the other story. This can be, of course, developed in the further discussions. But I wanted only to point this out at this special moment of the discussion.
And what do you think in that context of the weapon supplies? What do you think about the activities of Biden administration? And do you think that Biden administration is risking a nuclear war?
Oh, yes, very definitely. We forget that the Russians have the capacity to escalate horizontally. That means that the Russians are in a position to make enormous trouble for us in Mexico, Venezuela, Cuba, in the Caribbean basin, which is, if you will, America's soft underbelly. So I think that's the first thing. But the Russians also are in a position to create instability in Northeast Asia with the use of North Korea. They've always held the key to North Korea. North Korea is extremely dependent on the Russians for everything, not China. That's something that people in the West do not understand. The Chinese don't like the North Koreans, have never been very excited about them. And there was an opportunity for Donald Trump to sign an agreement that would have put North Korea on the road to an inevitable dissolution and absorption by the South. Unfortunately, we missed that opportunity. But the point is that also in the Middle East, in Central Asia, there are so many places where the Russians wield tremendous influence. And certainly in Eastern Europe, pressure can be applied all along NATO's border on the east. So it's our behavior has been worse, in my judgment, than simply incautious. It's been deliberately foolish and reckless. We've acted as though Russia is the Russia of 1992, prostrate, poor, impoverished, riddled with corruption, incapable of anything. Russia today is very different from what Russia was in the 1990s, as you know. It is today truly a great power. And of course, it has this enormous nuclear arsenal, which always has to be kept in mind. Because even though people on all sides see the wisdom of avoiding a nuclear confrontation, I really believe that, there are so many things that could happen that could potentially trigger such a thing that it should be avoided at all costs. So I think this administration has been very reckless. And unfortunately, I think you are the victims of that recklessness.
Thank you very much. Well, when it comes to the economic consequences we are already facing, this time I would like to start with my country, my homeland, with Poland, and with our Member of Parliament, Grzegorz Braun. How do you perceive the current economic consequences for Poland, for our country, of what is going on there in Ukraine, and of our involvement in the Ukrainian conflict?
A new tax has been imposed on Polish people. New taxation. Polish people have to pay for this war to be prolonged directly by funding arms, funding supplies, funding supply routes, funding all those necessary army and other services procedures that have applied, and it's very costly. We are hostages, but we are also slaves. We are slaves because we are supposed to work and overwork ourselves, our families, our nation for some foreign causes. Our president, our prime minister, and their services, they have no right to spend their precious time, which constitutionally they are supposed to use for the good of Polish people, Polish nation, and Polish state. They have no right to spend time like, for example, the president and the prime minister going abroad all over the world and preaching for Ukraine, because this is not their business. Poland right now is not defending its territory, its interests. It's selling out its interests and her territory for some dark businesses and very vague reasons. Neither Washington nor London are helping in this recovery process. Just the opposite. They are nourishing this caricature of a nation, and they are supplying this regime that cannot help being deadly to its own citizens. So that's it for now from me.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And you have raised another additional interesting topic. So I would just have one short question to Larry Johnson. The whole project idea of radical Ukrainian nationalism was more or less developed by U.S. secret services after the Second World War, I mean. On the other hand, we have had a discussion in the Congress in 2017, if I'm not wrong. And in that discussion, I remember that some of the U.S. congressmen pointed out that the so-called Azov battalion and other radical neo-Nazi units in Ukraine might be perceived or should be perceived as a terrorist threat. So how would you comment on that? I mean, is it still true that the United States or some agencies, security agencies from the United States, are nourishing, as Mr. Brown told, parts of the most radical nationalists and neo-Nazis in Ukraine?
Well, if you're looking for moral consistency from the United States, you will be in a forever search. You're never going to find it. So right at the end of World War II, Operation Paperclip, as it became known, was we no longer saw the Nazis as the ultimate evil that had to be defeated. Instead, we were rapidly recruiting German scientists and Gestapo officers. Klaus Barbie was the most prominent, where they were protected. I mean, people who had been involved with murdering Jews and facilitating the murder of Jews and Slavs and others, gypsies, all of a sudden became our big pals. We protected them. And because we now decided that the Soviet Union was the great threat, the great enemy. Well, and I understand on the one hand, the whole legacy of the Katyn Forest and the role of the Soviets in murdering Polish luminaries and students. I mean, that hurts. That leaves an open scar that continues to this day. There's a tendency of foreigners to believe that in the United States, that our policymakers actually have a secret plan, that they're really smart. They've got something that they're not showing all their cards, that they're not really as stupid as they appear. And I have a news flash for everybody. They are that stupid. They don't think this through. You would think that somebody at CIA had been asked on the eve of imposing sanctions on Russia that, do we have any instance in history where sanctions have worked to stop the behavior of another country and promote our own national interests? Because if they would have asked that question, the answer would have been, nope, never, doesn't work. So now what the United States has done by taking the lead and trying to punish Russia, that has created an incentive that Russia finally woke up from its effort to try to be part of the West and recognized it can never be part of the West. It is in the process with China of creating an alternative financial system. And it's going to force Europe, particularly Central Europe, the countries of Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic, to make a decision. Are they still going to play part of the rules-based international order that the United States controls and uses for its own benefit, to benefit itself? Or are they going to participate in something that has a chance of being much more equitable?
Thank you, Larry. And now when it comes to the economic consequences of the sanctions, we have talked about the sanctions as well. I have a question to Senator Şoşoacă. What are the costs? How would you estimate the costs of the current war in Ukraine for Romania and for Romanian state budget?
We have new taxes imposed on Romanian people, like exactly what Mr. Brown said before. New tax for Romanians, but because we have to funding army, NATO army, we pay for every soldier in Romania 1,000 euro per day from our budget. It's enormous. Do you know where these soldiers live? They don't live like in a war in some military houses. No, they live in hotels, and they want 4 and 5 stars. They want massages. They want spa. They want relaxing. They want girls. They have 2 hours on practicing army per day, and after that they come back to their hotels and they want to stay as aristocrats. This is how we do war nowadays. But for this we pay. We have everything a country needs to be very rich, and we have nothing. They destroyed us. The energy crisis is a consequence of the miscalculation made by the West that if it stopped buying hydrocarbons from Russia, it would suffocate the economy of Russia. Europe will simply suffocate from lack of energy resources. So I have to remind you that in Romania, we have energy resources. We are the richest country in EU in energy resources. In fact, the subsidy granted by the states is also paid by the population through inflation and tax increases. This is all about in this moment, and it will be worse.
When it comes to the economic aspects of the whole situation, do you think that there is anyone in the world that bargains and profits the whole situation? Perhaps China, perhaps United States. Well, definitely it's not Europe. But what's your opinion, by the way, about the Seymour Hersh theory about blowing up of Nord Stream pipelines?
Well, remember, our economy cannot be viewed in isolation from, say, Germany. Germany is being destroyed. Germany is being deindustrialized. Germany is the heartbeat in scientific industrial terms of the European Union. As the European Union and the countries that are members of it begin to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into this economic trough and slow down, that's affecting us here inside the United States. Now, some people think that, well, we're selling liquefied natural gas at exorbitant prices to people in Europe. Well, that may provide some short-term boost, but it's not a long-term solution. And people do understand that in the energy sector. At the same time, the same people who have really harmed the European standard of living on the basis of this climate change scam are also doing damage to us here at home in the United States. I mean, we once had inexhaustible numbers of refineries. Today, we have maybe 60, 70 in the entire country, of which only 25 or 30 are operating at capacity. In other words, we've harmed ourselves just as the Europeans have harmed themselves. And finally, you know, we've tried to sanction Russia without very much success because sanctions are always easily circumvented. And we've discovered that most of the world wants to do business with Russia, whether we like it or not. That includes Japan and Korea, not just China. So South Korea and Japan together are enormous economic powers. And if they're going to continue to do business with Russia, whether we like it or not, what are we actually accomplishing? Well, not very much. We've harmed ourselves here at home. There's no question about it. This entire war could come to a very rapid closure if the various economic factors involved in the United States were to suddenly have an impact here at home. I mean, this is one of the questions that comes up regularly. You know, what happens with rising interest rates, and at the same time that interest rates are rising, you're printing more money? How do you expect to control inflation with rising interest rates if you print more money? What is the impact on the bond market and bond yields? How long before people finally decide to sell American bonds, treasuries? I mean, if that were to happen overnight, this would crash our economy, destroy our financial system. What we've tried to do is fix structural problems in the United States, economic problems, with the use of a financial tool called monetary policy. Well, that won't work. Either you build things and produce things, or you don't. All of these things are in play right now. No one knows how they will come together. My point is, if I were a European right now, my preoccupation would be, let's stop the war. That's the intelligent thing to do, and make it abundantly clear that we've got to come up with some sort of arrangement that gives us peace. It may not be the ideal arrangement. We may have to revisit it in the future, but right now, what's in everyone's interest is peace, because peace brings stability and potentially prosperity. And as you know, Ukraine has been effectively destroyed as a nation and a state. There's not much left. In fact, much of what is left is sitting in your country. So should we ignore the news disseminated by particularly German media lately, that the Nord Stream explosions were caused by a group of Ukrainian partisans? Well, I know Cy Hersh, and he's a very competent reporter. He's got a good track record. Cy does not publish things that he is not confident are wrong. In other words, he's not going to say something he doesn't think is true. So I tend to think that his argument is probably accurate. Now, as far as the details of how this was done and who did it, that's another matter. In other words, what I'm saying within the American military. But I think he's pinned the tail on the right donkey in this case, which is us. And of course, you have all of these foolish American politicians, from the president to Nuland and others, threatening dramatically to do exactly what was done. Inconceivable to me that we would be that stupid, but then again, I never thought we'd be as stupid as we are to instigate and then stoke this fire of war in eastern Ukraine. Makes no sense to me at all.
Thank you very much. Question to Mr. Williamson. What do you think from the point of view of, let's say, political economy? Who benefits the whole conflict, and who benefits the sanctions? Because I guess that someone benefits.
Yes, of course, and it's very clear. It's the military-industrial complex. It's the corporate capitalist class. They benefit from it. We've already established very strong links with colleagues in the United States of America. Indeed, the organizer of the Rage Against the War machine in the US flew across, actually, from the US the night before we launched the No to NATO campaign. I do think that's really important that we build those links, particularly in countries where there are members of NATO. I mean, I don't believe there's any way in which Ukraine can win this war. And we've seen, haven't we, images of people literally being press ganged on the streets, forced into the Ukrainian military, into this kind of meat grinder, as does Poland, of still having its own currency, issuing its own currency. So it's not, restricted in the way in which those countries which have made the stupid mistake of going in with the euro, and they are then subject to the vagaries of the European Central Bank. They don't have the the discretion to be able to determine, how they're going to run their economy. It's kind of determined by the European Central Bank to a large extent.
Thank you. Yes, I personally share your opinion that we should particularly care about creating contacts, networks, and links between United Kingdom, United States, which are, let's say, a driving force from the geopolitical point of view of the proxy war going on in Ukraine, and those countries which are on the front line, like Poland, like Romania, like the Baltic countries as well. I'd like to, as we are closing to finish of our debate, I would like to ask Konrad to shortly summarize what we have talked about today.
Thank you very much, Mateusz, and thank you for all the participants. I would say that I strongly believe that we can all agree that the thing which unites us today, and not only today, in our daily work as well, is our resistance against jingoism, against Nazism, against increasing war threat. So all these phenomena, which are perfectly, unfortunately, represented by the present banderist Kiev regime, of course, being just a tool of anglo-saxon imperialism and militarism. And, well, we are also fully aware that present stage of Ukrainian war can be very easily spread to the other parts of Europe, and not only Europe, also to China, to Iran, to another part of the world, whatever would be targeted by the imperialists. And, well, of course, what even more we can agree that this is not only the nuclear threat we are facing with, it's also elements of the economical crisis, which could be even more devastating for now than the direct proxy war. We know that it's some kind of smoke screen for deeper transition of present way of global neoliberal capitalism. Yeah? This is then another step after COVID crisis, after so-called energy transition, and another political decisions made over us just to push people to live the way globalists would like to see. And well, I think that Mr. Williamson and Senator Şoşoakę absolutely rightly pointed about it, that these costs, whatever we say about the, this chiefly and illegally established tax law mentioned by Grzegorz Braun, or we speak about the directly anti-worker politics of neoliberal governments Chris Williamson said about, all these decisions, all these political moves point directly to the one interest of the military industrial complex and to the interest of the neoliberal global financier. That's absolutely, I think we can all agree about. And well, it's also something, well, optimistic, I believe, which we can take from our discussion. We need international network for peace. George Galloway and Chris Williamson will be soon hosted great event in London within the global action, Humanity for Peace, remembering Hiroshima and Nagasaki disaster, nuclear disaster, tragedy managed by imperialists, and it should be definite and final sign for humanity to think about the future, because well, next generation could easily have no one. So discussion about this network for peace is absolutely urgent, present, and the most important challenge we all face with. And I think such a meetings, which I strongly thank you once again for Mateusz for moderating, and all our participants for taking part with. I think that such debates are small steps toward the peace, and I think that it's optimistic even in these tragic times we live.